Dismal Wilderness. The Jesuit missionary Isaac Jogues became the first recorded European to travel through the center of the Adirondacks as a beaten and tortured captive by Mohawk hunting party, no less, in 1642. More than a century later, in 1784, Governor Thomas Pownall wrote that the Native Americans referred to the area as the Dismal Wilderness, or the habitation of winter, and that the area was, quote, either not much known to them, or, if known, very wisely by them, kept from the knowledge of the Europeans. A young student from Harvard, and later a recognized historian of the forests and Indians, Francis Parkman, wrote, quote, far on the left rose the forest ridges of the Green Mountains, and on the right the Adirondacks, haunts in later years of amateur sportsmen from counting rooms and college halls. Then the Iroquois made them their hunting ground. And beyond, in the valleys of the Mohawk, the Onondaga, and the Genesee, stretched the long line of their 5 cantons and palisaded towns. The French and Indian Wars of the 18th century began or festered in the backcountry of what is now Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh or Fort Duquesne, and spread into New York, into the Finger Lakes and Mohawk Valley regions. The Iroquois usually sided with the English and Dutch. The French mostly allied with the Three Fires nations, known as the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. Soldiering in these wars fostered the careers and notoriety of some now historically established personalities, including George Washington himself, leading a Virginia regiment. Among the wagoneers transporting supplies to what is today viewed as General Braddock's Fort Duquesne debacle in 1755 in western Pennsylvania were 2 young men who would later become legends, Daniel Boone and Daniel Morgan. Other members of the expedition included Ensign William Crawford and Charles Scott. General Braddock led a force of British over the Alleghenies to take Fort Duquesne, later Fort Pitt, but was defeated by the French and Canadian troops under Daniel Leonard de Beaujeu with their Indian allies. The defeat marked the end of that British expedition to gain control of the strategic Ohio country. The French call it the Illinois country. Both Braddock and Beaujeu were killed in action. This Battle of the Monongahela, also known as the Battle of Braddock's Field and Battle of the Wilderness, took place 10 miles east of today's Pittsburgh. During the fighting, the natives would scream a whoop sound that spread fear among the British infantrymen. The hair of dead soldiers adorned the area's trees. Boone and cousin Daniel Morgan narrowly escaped the melee. While on the campaign, Boone met John Finley, a packer who worked for George Croghan in the Trans-Appalachian fur trade. Finley invited Boone on his first hunting trip to Kentucky 12 years later. That guy Croghan, an Irish-born trader in the Ohio country, in 1746 had been appointed as a British representative of the Iroquois Onondaga Council until he was banned for treason from the frontier in 1777. During and after King George's War in the 1740s, he helped negotiate new treaties and alliances for the British with the natives. And in 1756, he became deputy Indian agent with chief responsibility for the Ohio region tribes. He assisted Sir William Johnson, British Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Northern District, who was based in central New York State and had strong alliances with the Iroquois. Following his appointment, a purchase by Croghan of roughly 200,000 acres from the Iroquois, exclusive of a slice of land at the forks of the Ohio River, created tension and conflict with efforts by Virginia's Ohio Company to settle the region. Many, if not all, of his land deeds eventually were invalidated. Interestingly, Boone's land holdings also over time mostly were invalidated due to technicalities, and he was virtually bankrupted. Croghan's death in 1782, shortly after the end of the Revolutionary War, received little notice. Mohawk Molly. Croghan's boss in New York, British loyalist Sir William Johnson, had allied himself closely with the local tribes and assumed the moniker Mohawk Baron. Johnson, unlike Croghan, became more famous partly due to his association with an Indian woman. Johnson, a Mohawk blood brother, and his mistress, Molly Brandt, the Indian maiden, raised 8 children at a major trading post he built in the Mohawk River Valley. It was Johnson who led a contingent of Indians and English in successful battles against the French at Lake George, New York, and Fort Niagara. Mary, or Molly Brandt, was the older sister of Chief Colonel Joseph Brandt, Adirondack. I quote from Flexner's Lord of the Mohawks. Molly's dark Indian eyes disguised fierce passions. She hated with a violence. Once she demanded the head of an enemy so that she could kick it around the room. Molly, quote, preserved the tribe's affection for her late husband, Sir William, whose memory she never mentioned without tears in her eyes, which affects the Indians greatly. She is in every respect considered and esteemed by them as Sir William's relic, and one word from her is more taken notice of by the Five Nations than 1,000 from any white man. From Daniel Claus, quoted by Alan Taylor, The Divided Ground. At age 60, Molly joined Sir William in the happier hunting grounds, perhaps, and was buried at St. George's, now St. Paul's, Anglican Churchyard, Queen Street, Kingston, Ontario, Canada, in 1795.
You gotta walk that lonesome valley. You gotta walk it by yourself. No one here can walk it.
Historically, in western New York, the Genesee River's gorge functioned as a clearly demarcated border between the lands of the Five Nations, whose range extended east, and the related tribes of the Erie people along the west side. By the end of the Beaver Wars, which occurred in 1640s to 1660s, and the American Revolution, the lands in all of upstate New York into the Ohio country were controlled by the Iroquois, also called Mingo.
Gotta walk it by yourself. No one here can walk it for you. You gotta walk it by yourself. Well, some say that Johnny was a Baptist, and others say he was a Jew. But the whole Bible tells us that he was a preacher too. And you've gotta walk that lonesome valley. You gotta walk